Hi, welcome. In this video, I'm going to be discussing, the context of free will and choice when it comes to dealing with a relationship problem between a dog and owner. Again, I talk about what defines a process, within the framework of a relationship problem. I talk about why it is that so many dog owners experience a counterfeit picture, a change within the framework of response itself. Okay, based on trainers who are not bringing the right criteria into a process. I talk about criteria. I'm talking about influence and control at the social level, reconciled properly by way of a intentional interaction based method, that brings it into the right conversation by way of a type of a power play. But understand this is the problem here. When I talk about power play, it's about clarity, the dog understanding intent. Intent is one of the big themes, and that relates to even how you're interacting, the interactions themselves, providing that clarity. Okay, speaking the right language to the dog, because again, it's all about the dog coming into agreement, with the interactions themselves, which change perception of dogs the right way. But here's the thing. I'll play some of this video because again, this is Dylan Jones. Okay, Dylan Jones right now. This is a you see another controversy, unfolding in the dog training community by way again of the Association of Canine Professionals, and again encompassing mostly balanced dog trainers. And again, this whole thing about punishment. Okay, this is one of the the controversial things that's happening is punishment itself. How is it how does it align? Okay, through balanced training. Again, I have a lot of videos going through it. But again, one of the big points of confusion here, and again, this goes into even in terms of response itself, okay, how it is that dogs can be looking a certain way and not be. They can be moving around, responding at times, and meanwhile you're assuming, because that's all it is, it's an assumption that those responses can be trusted, representing that perceptions of dogs are changed, that they're seeing you the right way in terms of relationship. Okay, and again, it's all about talk about defined through nature, strength and weakness defined through as dogs as pack animals. But again, you get into this thing about free will and choice. We're going to talk about this, okay? Because I'm gonna draw on a very clear example here as we talk about the context of free will and choice, but why this opens the door up, to so much confusion. These trainers, in terms of a counterfeit picture of change. So let's play some of this video because this is Dylan Jones. He's going to mention this. He's talking about aggression rehab. Okay, so Dylan Jones follows the path of the play-based, training without conflict. Okay, and I done a couple of videos about the without conflict part. That's a red flag right away. Because understand when you have a relationship problem that's already happening, there's conflict. Okay, it's a relationship problem. Okay, so when you're transitioning or reconciling the roles, you're bringing those core ingredients in. You have the right conversation. Guess what? There's going to be conflict. Okay, in that transition itself. But again, talk about the parenting example, which I'll bring up here because just consider the parenting example because it's the same type of social contract. Okay, it's the same type of interplay, same type of dynamics in play. It all makes sense when you start to consider, but it all makes sense too how it is that so many dog owners end up with a fake picture of change. Okay, I mean this is common in the dog training world. So let's play someone's video put out by Dylan Jones.
All right, so I do want to talk about that video I shared a little while ago from the Director of Education at the IACP. There's no doubt people, because of the world of behavioral modification.
So again, you said and again, I put a video about the remote collar. Okay, how everything aligns, for the dog to make sense of. Okay, the interactions are what do that. Okay, the interactions that bring influence and control in the right way, that align it properly. Okay, provide clarity to the dog. Then everything is secondary. Everything branches off of that. Whether it's a crate, whether it's a remote collar, as a secondary tool, not a primary tool. Okay, those things are all reconciled through the right approach. Okay, understand these trainers, they're not dialed in that way. Okay, make that very clear. It was Dylan Jones, balanced dog trainers, play based, whatever. Okay, not dialed in that way. There's a reason why they attach labels too. I put a video about that because, it's a lack of insight.
Aggression rehab and all this is such, like, take normal pet training and how bad it is. The behavioral mod world is in an even worse dark age. No one has.
So it seems to be a lot of agreement, right, about because you'll hear these trainers go on about the dog world is in such a mess, right? I mean, that's a common kind of theme here. You see, whether all these trainers are always talking about, and this has been going on since the beginning. Dog trainers fighting with each other. Now you're seeing this controversy right now with this association on the heels of a conference, right? Inviting force-free speakers there. I talk about that because I've done a ton of videos going through this. But understand, this is a type of identity crisis here. Understand that when I put out the information for those who already kind of have sold out or basically turned over to this stuff, it's so difficult for these individuals to step back as individuals and question it because it forces these individuals into a trade-off situation.
Has any idea what they're doing. It's absolutely fucking atrocious. And as a result,
and you'll hear that like it's atrocious. They don't know what they're doing, but again, it comes down to the question is, well, what's their idea? I talk about that. It comes down to the core ingredients. Are they reconciled through play-based or whatever it is? Yes or no? See, it's very specific. And that's the good news, right? Because you don't have to guess. You don't have to. I talk about it. You can put everything I say to the test. Are they reconciled? Yes or no? And the answer here is no. Okay. But again, these trainers, so it turns into nothing more than virtue signaling for a lot of these trainers, trying to elevate themselves in social media.
Of nobody in these positions of influence having no idea what they're doing, everyone downstream of that information has no idea what they're doing. So people likely are going to have questions. What specifically do I have a problem with in the video? And it is actually just very straightforward if you have learned from someone that knows what they're doing. Exactly. And you've done this a bunch of times successfully. It's very obvious.
So he's saying a bunch of times successfully. I even say, well, what's success mean within the, at the appearance level? Like, understand something here. Like, this is the problem: is that so much is governed in the dog training world just by appearances. People just assume things, right? They just look at response, or they look at certain, and they assume, and then they get blindsided, or they know something's still wrong, right? How do you put it to the test? Well, I show that. How do you put the current state relationship to the test? So those core ingredients come in, everything aligns the way I talk about, and then you're going to get the right information. But not just that, then change itself. Okay. So here, these trainers again got lots to say. And they put out, they'll kind of default back into how they define success. But I go further than that for a reason, because the dog training world's a mess. You can't do that. All right. These trainers do it all the time, and both groups do it. Zach George can talk about success too at that level, right? I mean, how do you actually pin these people down? Well, I show how to do that.
There is a specific pain point for me that is just completely contradictory to good rehabilitation and good dog training. And that is the dog being put in a position with an illusion of choice.
Here it is, right here. Okay, this is the fork in the road. Here's the crux of it. Okay, talk about illusion of choice. So we talk about choices here, okay? We talk about free will.
Choice is the crux of everything when you're rehabilitating dogs that have behavioral issues. The dog knowing there are consequences, good and bad, to my actions, and I am a free acting agent.
So here, okay, now this is the problem in the dog training world. This is like one of the major problems, okay, is understanding this issue about choice. But I'll leave again. I want to leave people the big takeaway here, and again, because you have to apply critical thinking. You take this over to the parenting example, okay, dealing with a relationship problem between a parent and child at the social level, a child that's become selfish, bad attitude, selfish, behavioral issues happening. What is the context? Here's a question. What's the context of free will and choice within the framework of a relationship problem where a parent, okay, is in terms of their role, okay, is engaging that, okay, to establish change. Think about that. What does that look like? I'll tell you what it looks like. Like I'll tell you what it looks like in the dog training world, okay, because this will make sense. Because how they approach training to begin with, they turn it into a learning based exercise. The four quadrants, right? This whole thing about choice, about response, about generating responses, right? Choices is, and this what sets in motion a counterfeit picture. Because I talk different, okay. So, but for them, it's about giving the dog a choice, but without understanding what even defines a process to begin with. In terms of what path does it follow? It's an intervention. It's not a learning based exercise because you're dealing with a relationship problem. So that highlights the roles themselves. And again, in terms of the path that you're following to establish a picture of change, these trainings, what they do is they'll motivate, right, a response, but from the point of a already ongoing relationship problem. But think of it like the parenting child example. The child's already selfish. And so their jumping in point is the same in terms of, well, I'm going to elicit a response. And I talk about this, like, yeah, you can get a child to pick up their toys and perform certain superficial good responses for something they want. But consider what I'm saying. Is that the be all and end all? Is that is that your pivot point in terms of, identifying those responses, and then they're attached the word behavior, right, to those responses. And the word behavior itself is attached to certain, even say, moments of bad behavior, right? I talk about an express state. But because there's so much confusion now brought in, because this whole choice thing, because I talk about, well, no, it's not about a choice, it's a demand. Okay, so you're actually taking, there's still a choice in a way, right? But that choice is defined through a demand where it's to bring it into a point of reconciling the roles themselves, to fade in, right? It brings it brings those core ingredients in when it takes it to, when I talk about demand through a intentional interaction based method. Because here's the thing, and then you have to bring the whole thing, the theme of intent in, because, and this is where you look at that video that, he's talking about with the president of that association, it's not defined properly to begin with in terms of a demand part, in terms of, funneling, intent. Those are absent there. Okay, so that's not what I'm talking about, because you see trainers that are moving around and how they're engaging. It's erratic. And so what it does is it doesn't provide clarity to the dog. It doesn't offer up a clear choice in terms of intent, but the choice comes to a demand. It's like, you're moving forward, okay, you're bringing it into a demand state, a demand level, but it's the same type of demand as again, bring it back to what I'm saying in terms of parent child example. You pick up your toys because you're the parent. Think about this. You have to really, just apply critical thinking versus pick up your toys and here's $100. Well, is parental influence part of that, type of a interplay when you bring it into an exchange like that in terms of, here's $100. Yeah, you can get a fantastic response. But in terms of relationship, in terms of the core ingredients, are they brought in through that type of transactional interplay? No, no. And if that's your whole focus in a very superficial way, which these trainers are doing, because what they're doing here is they're saying, oh, I can trust that response. They're not considering, okay, does that bring in what is training? Like your role in that, how's influence and control, how do they define through at the social level, how they reconcile? Just like parental influence, how's it reconcile? How's parental influence established? It's through, hey, pick up your toys because it's a reasonable demand too. See, this is the problem here too, is like, if I get a bad reaction, think about this, because this is what these trainers how they try to label me or pin certain people in with compulsion. Oh, he's a force trainer, he's a compulsive trainer. So the reactions themselves are happening. They're not able to reconcile those properly, right? Because they themselves are caught in this trap. And so they're looking at appearances a certain way. And then see, and they're not able to reconcile the reaction to the relationship properly because they're superficially focused. So the reactions that are generated through this system, right? They'll label it as abuse, not, but then they themselves are going to be left with a bad picture of change. That's the trade-off. It's not a good trade-off, but that's the choices, right? That they're bringing people into to accept the bad picture. I don't do that. And so, because when I put again, just like a parent putting a demand on a selfish child, you could and this is what I say about what's revealed, right? The truth is going to be revealed because that child that's very selfish saying, I'm not picking up my toys. And they're going to start to what? Engage and talk back to you. And, what happens then? Okay. I mean, think about that, but here's the problem. You have to reconcile the reaction to or the response to the relationship. So if the really selfish child is a really bad temper reaction, and it's like, does that represent that I physically engage that child to create that? Like, take out your notepad right now and start writing or rewatch this video. Okay, this all start making sense. No, it didn't necessarily mean that at all. It just means that the child's a brat. Okay, and so when you connect all the dots properly, you start to get clarity as to why the dog training world is in the state that it's in. These trainers, they pivot on this whole thing about choice, but the wrong way. They don't understand the door that they're opening up here with a bad picture, what you're left with in the end. So I say the system of training, okay, is totally different. Okay, it answers the questions. It's a complete system. Okay, these trainers, they've never dealt with, they never, if you ask them these questions about free will and choice, you start to put it, they can't, they're going to speed wobble. They can't respond, but then they end up with a bad picture. And they want to write it off or try to make excuses, or someone gets hurt or bitten. There you go. So again, free will and choice. This is one of the major problems in the dog training world as it relates to what they're marketing. Okay, I talk about it within the parameters of what defines a process, but then take everything I say and take it over to the parent example. Everything starts to make complete sense. Thanks for watching.